80,000 pounds of rotting French oak. That's what Hannah woke up to. An illegal, wine-soaked graveyard deliberately dumped on her fragile farm by a ruthless neighboring estate. They thought the cleanup would ruin her. Instead, she turned their trash into a six-figure empire and made them pay for every splinter. The rumble of heavy diesel engines was the first thing that tore through the quiet Oregon night. At 2:15 a.m., Hannah Mercer bolted upright in her bed. The farmhouse walls vibrated slightly, a faint rattling echoing through the floorboards. Her family's 80-acre property, Mercer Pastures, sat at the end of a dead-end gravel road in the Willamette Valley. Nobody came down that road by accident, and certainly not with engines that sounded like commercial freightliners. She grabbed her heavy canvas jacket, slipped on her boots, and grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight from the kitchen counter. By the time she made it to the wraparound porch, the tail lights of 3 massive flatbed trucks were already disappearing into the thick coastal fog, kicking up a furious cloud of dust. When the sun finally crested over the distant pine ridges, the fog burned off to reveal a nightmare. There, sitting squarely on her lower grazing pasture, the only 2 acres of flat, fertile land she had left to grow winter alfalfa for her cattle, was a mountain of wood and rusting metal. Hundreds upon hundreds of massive, weathered wooden wine barrels had been unceremoniously bulldozed off the flatbeds. They were piled haphazardly, some crushed under the weight of others. Metal hoops snapped, wood splintered. A pungent, suffocating stench of vinegar, fermented grapes, and rotting wood hung heavy in the damp morning air. Hannah walked toward the pile, her boots sinking into a muddy puddle of dark red liquid seeping from the broken casks. She touched one of the intact barrels. It was massive, easily 60 gallons, and stamped into the center stave was an elegant, burned-in logo, Croft Estate and Cellars. Hannah's stomach dropped. Croft Estate was the multi-million-dollar corporate vineyard that had bought up 300 acres of prime real estate just 2 miles up the highway. They catered to wealthy tourists from Portland, boasting helicopter pads and $500 tasting menus. They were untouchable, and they had just turned her farm into their private landfill. By noon, Hannah had counted them. 800 barrels. She immediately called the county sheriff. Deputy Higgins arrived an hour later, took one look at the mountain of oak, and sighed. "Hannah, I'm sorry, but without video evidence or a license plate of those trucks, I can't prove Harrison Croft ordered this. It's a civil matter. You'll have to take it up with him or sue him." Furious, Hannah drove her battered 1998 Ford pickup straight to the wrought-iron gates of Croft Estate. She marched past the pristine fountains and the valet parking, straight into the ultra-modern glass and steel tasting room. She demanded to see Harrison Croft. When the CEO finally emerged from his glass-walled office, he looked at her muddy boots with undisguised contempt. Harrison was a man who wore custom Italian suits in a farming county. He smiled a tight, shark-like smile. "Ms. Mercer, is it?" Harrison said, keeping his voice leveled so the nearby wine tasters wouldn't hear. "I understand you have some debris on your property." "Debris?" Hannah's voice shook with suppressed rage. "You dumped 800 rotting barrels on my alfalfa field. I want them gone by tomorrow, or I'm calling the EPA." Harrison chuckled, adjusting his cuffs. "You're welcome to call whoever you like. Croft Estate recently contracted a third-party waste disposal company, Apex Hauling, to remove our retired French oak. If they experienced a logistical error and dumped them on your land to save mileage, that is strictly between you and Apex. We hold no liability." Hannah stared at him. "Apex Hauling? Let me guess, a shell company that filed for bankruptcy this morning." Harrison's smile widened just a fraction. "I really wouldn't know the state of their finances, But I suggest you clean up your pasture, Miss Mercer. Oak rot is terrible for soil pH. He turned his back and walked away. Hannah drove home in a daze. When she looked up Apex Hauling on her laptop, she found exactly what she expected: a defunct LLC registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. Harrison Croft had exploited a legal loophole to dump 80,000 pounds of industrial waste, avoiding the astronomical disposal fees required for treated commercial wood. The real disaster struck 3 days later. A white SUV with the county seal pulled into her driveway. Mr. Abernathy, a strict by-the-book environmental inspector, stepped out. He took soil samples around the barrel mountain. "Ms. Mercer," Abernathy said, his clipboard pressed against his chest. "These barrels contain concentrated wine dregs, tartaric acid, and heavy commercial cleaning sulfates. It's leaching into the groundwater. Because it is on your property, you are technically the liable party." "They aren't mine," Hannah pleaded. "Look at the stamp. They say Croft Estate." "Unless you can prove in a court of law that Croft directly transported them here, the liability falls to the landowner," Abernathy said sympathetically, but firmly. "You have 30 days to remove the hazardous material and remediate the topsoil. After that, it's a $500 a day fine." Hannah felt the world spin. Her farm was already operating on razor-thin margins. She was behind on the mortgage. When she called local waste management companies to get quotes for hauling away 800 heavy, wet oak barrels, the lowest estimate was $18,000. She didn't have $1,800, let alone $18,000. Harrison Croft hadn't just dumped his trash on her land. He had handed her a death sentence for Mercer Pastures. For 2 weeks, Hannah lived in a state of paralyzing dread. The rainy season started early, and every downpour caused the red, acidic sludge to bleed further into her pasture. The alfalfa was already turning yellow and dying. Her younger brother, Wyatt, who worked as a mechanic in town and helped on the farm during weekends, tried everything to help. They spent an entire Saturday trying to chop the barrels into firewood using chainsaws, but the thick metal staves ruined 3 expensive chainsaw chains in an hour. Burning them was illegal without an industrial permit, and burying them would poison the water table forever. With 14 days left until the county fines kicked in, Hannah was sitting on a plastic bucket in her late father's barn, staring at a foreclosure notice she had drafted, but hadn't yet mailed to the bank. Outside, a loud crack echoed across the field. Hannah ran out to see Wyatt standing next to the pile, holding a heavy sledgehammer. He had swung it in frustration at one of the barrels that had rolled loose. The rusted metal hoops had snapped, and the barrel had collapsed into a pile of curved wooden planks. "Sorry," Wyatt muttered, kicking a piece of wood. "Just angry." Hannah walked over to the shattered barrel. She knelt in the mud and picked up one of the heavy, curved wooden staves. It was filthy on the outside, covered in grey weather stains and dirt. But where the wood had splintered, Hannah saw something that made her breath catch. She walked back to the barn, flipped on her father's heavy-duty tabletop wood planer, and fed the splintered stave through the shrieking blades. When it came out the other side, Hannah and Wyatt simply stared. Beneath a millimeter of grey rot, the wood was absolutely flawless. It was quarter-sawn, premium French white oak. But it wasn't just oak. Years of aging Croft's expensive Pinot Noir and Cabernets had deeply dyed the inside of the wood. The natural grain was infused with a breathtaking, marbled swirl of deep burgundy, crimson, and burnt amber. "Wyatt," Hannah whispered, running her thumb over the glass, smooth, blood-red grain. "Do you know how much raw, quarter-sawn French oak costs?" "A lot?" "A fortune," she corrected. "And this has a natural wine-stain patina you can't replicate in a factory. It's stunning." Hannah's father had been a master carpenter before his heart gave out, and Hannah had spent her entire childhood in that barn, learning how to joint, plane, and route wood. She hadn't touched the tools in years, not since the farm consumed all her waking hours. Suddenly, she didn't see an $18,000 cleanup bill. She saw 80,000 pounds of the most exotic premium lumber on the West Coast. They had 12 days left. Hannah and Wyatt stopped sleeping. They rented an angle grinder for $40 and spent 3 brutal, blistering days cutting the metal hoops off 60 barrels. They broke them down into individual staves, washing the acidic dregs off with a pressure washer. Hannah began to build. She designed a massive, rustic farmhouse dining table. Because the staves were naturally curved, she had to meticulously steam and press them flat, joining the pieces with industrial epoxy to showcase the incredible red wine marbling. She used the rusted heavy metal hoops to forge custom iron legs, clear-coating the metal to preserve the industrial weathered look. It took her 4 days to finish the first table. When she applied the final coat of tung oil, the deep ruby tones of the oak exploded with color. It looked like a piece of modern art, simultaneously rustic and ultra-luxurious. She loaded the table into the back of her truck and drove it to a high-end artisan furniture boutique in Portland's Pearl District. The boutique owner, a woman named Fiona, walked outside to inspect it. Fiona touched the smooth, wine-stained surface, her eyes wide. "Where did you source this wood?" Fiona asked. "It's reclaimed French oak," Hannah said smoothly, "sourced from a premium Willamette Valley vineyard." Fiona bought it on the spot for $2,800. She also handed Hannah a check for a $4,000 deposit and commissioned 3 more just like it. Hannah drove back to the farm with tears stinging her eyes. She wasn't going to lose the farm. Over the next 2 months, Mercer Pastures transformed. Hannah hired 3 local farmhands to act as a demolition crew, breaking down the massive mountain of barrels. The county inspector, Mr. Abernathy, returned, only to find the hazardous waste neatly organized on concrete tarps, being processed into raw materials. He gladly granted her an environmental extension. Hannah launched an Instagram page, Crimson Oak Designs. She posted videos of the raw, ugly, mud-covered barrels being planed down to reveal the dazzling red-stained wood beneath. She built coffee tables, Adirondack chairs, custom bar stools, and massive butcher blocks. Her story, a female farmer turning reclaimed wine barrels into luxury furniture, went viral. Within 90 days, Crimson Oak Designs had a 6-month waitlist. She was clearing $15,000 a month in pure profit. The financial weight that had crushed her family for a decade evaporated. But the internet is a small place, and success always draws eyes. On a rainy Tuesday, 6 months after the barrels were dumped, a black Mercedes S-Class rolled slowly down the gravel driveway of Mercer Pastures. Hannah was in the barn, wearing safety goggles and running a sander over a custom headboard, when the shadow fell over her workbench. She turned it off and pulled down her mask. Standing in the doorway of her barn was Harrison Croft. Beside him was a man in a sharp grey suit holding a leather briefcase. Harrison looked around the bustling barn. He saw the pallets of perfectly milled, wildly expensive French oak. He saw the finished dining tables wrapped in moving blankets, tagged with invoices for $4,000, $5,000, and $6,000. His jaw clenched in barely concealed fury. "Miss Mercer," Harrison said, his voice dripping with venom. "I see you've been busy." "Mr. Croft," Hannah replied, crossing her arms. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to drop off more trash?" The man in the suit stepped forward. "I am Mr. Croft's chief legal counsel. We are here to serve you with an official cease and desist, as well as a summons for grand larceny and intellectual property theft." Hannah stared at them, a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Excuse me?" Harrison smiled that same shark-like smile from months ago. "Those barrels, Ms. Mercer, contain the proprietary branding of Croft Estate. They are our physical property. They were placed on your land temporarily due to a logistical error by our contractor. By destroying them and selling the materials for profit, you have stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars in corporate assets." He pointed a manicured finger at a finished table. "You aren't a brilliant entrepreneur, Hannah. You're a thief. And I'm going to take every single dime you've made. And then I am going to take this farm." The heavy manila envelope hit Hannah's workbench with a dull, sickening thud. The man in the suit, Preston Abercrombie, a senior partner at the ruthless Portland corporate litigation firm Abercrombie, Hayes and Miller, didn't even blink as he delivered the blow. Hannah stared at the injunction. The legal jargon swam before her eyes, but the numbers were crystal clear. Harrison Croft was suing her for $450,000 in stolen assets, $200,000 in brand defamation, and all past, present, and future profits from Crimson Oak Designs. The paperwork included an immediate judicial freeze on her business bank accounts, effective that very morning. "You have until Friday to surrender all remaining inventory," Abercrombie stated, adjusting his silk tie with absolute predatory calm. "If you try to sell a single splinter of Croft Estate wood, you will be held in contempt of court. Have a pleasant afternoon, Ms. Mercer." Harrison Croft offered a mocking two-finger salute before turning on his heel. The two men climbed back into the sleek black Mercedes and drove away, leaving Hannah standing in the sawdust, her breathing shallow and ragged. For a week, the farm fell into a desperate silence. The machinery was turned off. The half-finished dining tables sat under plastic tarps like corpses. With her accounts frozen, Hannah couldn't pay her farmhands, let alone afford a corporate defense attorney. Wyatt, furious and helpless, spent his evenings hitting a punching bag in the barn until his knuckles bled. Hannah knew she was entirely out of her depth. Croft had unlimited capital. He could drag this out in court for years until she went bankrupt on legal fees alone. Desperation drove her into the city. She visited 7 different law offices in downtown Portland, carrying a binder full of her designs, the initial county environmental reports, and the lawsuit. Every single lawyer took one look at the opposing counsel, Abercrombie, Hayes, and Miller, and politely showed her the door. They all told her the exact same thing. Croft had the registered trademarks, the original purchase orders for the French oak, and the financial power to crush her into the dirt. Just as she was ready to give up, a junior clerk at the 7th firm took pity on her and slipped her a crumpled business card. It read, "Margaret Donovan, Agricultural and Environmental Law." Margaret Peggy Donovan worked out of a cramped, dusty office above a hardware store in Salem. She was a 60-year-old woman with a smoker's rasp, sharp green eyes, and a legendary reputation for despising corporate vineyard conglomerates. When Hannah walked in and laid the massive injunction on the desk, Peggy didn't dismiss her. She poured 2 cups of black coffee, put on her reading glasses, and scoured the documents for 3 straight hours without speaking a single word. When Peggy finally looked up, a terrifying, brilliant smile spread across her face. "Croft is arrogant," Peggy rasped, tapping a long fingernail against the lawsuit. "He's used to bullying small farmers who don't read the fine print. He thinks because he registered these barrels as proprietary corporate assets, he owns them forever." "Doesn't he?" Hannah asked, her voice trembling. "They have his brand burned right into the staves. I sanded some off, but it's still his wood." "Yes, but he made a fatal error," Peggy said, standing up and walking over to a massive bookshelf filled with Oregon state legal codes. She pulled down a heavy leather-bound volume and dropped it on the desk. He officially put in writing, right here in this lawsuit, that this wood is his physical property and that it was placed on your land by his authorized contractors. He just admitted ownership of the dump. Hannah frowned, confused. Which means I stole from him. That proves his case. No, honey, Peggy chuckled, lighting a cigarette. It means he just confessed to a Class C felony. Peggy explained the trap. Under the Federal Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, commonly known as RCRA, dumping commercial chemical waste, including wood heavily saturated with industrial cleaning sulfates and tartaric acid, is a severe environmental crime. When Harrison Croft initially told the sheriff it was a third-party error, he was hiding behind his defunct shell company, Apex Hauling. He had plausible deniability. But by filing this lawsuit to steal Hannah's profits, Croft had officially claimed the barrels back as his own property. He legally tied himself to the hazardous waste. We aren't going to fight him over intellectual property, Peggy grinned, blowing a plume of smoke toward the ceiling. We are going to call the United States Environmental Protection Agency and hand them his written confession. And then we are going to file a massive countersuit. The following Tuesday, Hannah and Peggy walked into the Multnomah County Courthouse for the preliminary injunction hearing. Judge Mitchell, a stern, no-nonsense magistrate with decades on the bench, presided over the sprawling courtroom. Harrison Croft sat at the plaintiff's table, looking intensely bored. Preston Abercrombie stood up and delivered a slick 20-minute presentation about corporate theft, brand dilution, and Hannah's malicious exploitation of Croft Estates property. When it was Peggy's turn, she didn't bring up the furniture. She didn't bring up the trademark. She walked over to the projector and displayed the initial environmental citation from County Inspector Abernathy. The report clearly showed the lethal levels of acid and industrial sulfates leaching into Mercer Pastures' groundwater. Your Honor, Peggy began, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. My client does not dispute that the wood originated from Croft Estate. In fact, we are thrilled that Mr. Croft has officially claimed ownership of these 800 barrels in his filed affidavit. Abercrombie frowned, exchanging a highly confused glance with Harrison. Peggy continued, because Mr. Croft has officially claimed these barrels as his property, he has also claimed liability for the hazardous chemicals they leaked into a protected agricultural watershed. I have already forwarded his sworn affidavit to the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and the federal EPA. Harrison's bored expression instantly evaporated. He sat bolt upright, his face draining of color. Under federal law, Peggy hammered on, the illegal dumping of 80,000 pounds of hazardous commercial waste carries a mandatory fine of $50,000 per day per violation. The waste sat on my client's land for 60 days before she was forced to remediate it herself. That is a $3 million federal fine. Furthermore, we are countersuing Croft Estate for $5 million in ecological damages, trespassing, and the emotional distress caused by poisoning a generational cattle farm. The courtroom went dead silent. Abercrombie jumped to his feet, his face flushed dark red. Objection, Your Honor. This is a patent absurdity. My client contracted a third party for disposal. A third party that Mr. Croft owned entirely, which dissolved the very morning of the dump, Peggy shot back, tossing a thick folder onto the judge's bench. I have the Delaware Corporate Registry proving Harrison Croft was the sole proprietor of Apex Hauling. He deliberately orchestrated an illegal hazardous waste dump to avoid commercial disposal fees. And now he is trying to use this court to steal the money my client legitimately earned cleaning up his crime scene. Judge Mitchell flipped through the registry, his expression darkening with every page. He looked over his glasses at Harrison Croft, who was now sweating profusely, his expensive Italian suit suddenly looking very tight. "Mr. Abercrombie," Judge Mitchell said, his voice dangerously low, "I highly suggest you step outside with your client and reconsider the merits of this lawsuit. Because if I rule that this property belongs to him, I am immediately forwarding this entire case file to the federal prosecutor's office." The recess lasted less than 20 minutes. When Harrison Croft and his lawyer returned to the courtroom, the arrogance was completely gone. Croft looked physically ill. Abercrombie, looking deeply humiliated, approached the bench and formally withdrew the lawsuit with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again. But Peggy wasn't done. In the courthouse hallway, she cornered them. "You withdrew the suit, which means you forfeit all claims to the wood. My client keeps her business, but we still have the countersuit for the environmental damages, and the EPA is still waiting for my phone call." Croft's hands were shaking. If the EPA launched a full investigation, his winery's organic certifications would be permanently stripped, his investors would flee, and he could genuinely face federal prison time. "What do you want?" Croft hissed, glaring at Hannah. "I want $500,000 in compensatory damages for the poison you dumped on my land," Hannah said, looking the billionaire dead in the eye, her voice steady and completely fearless. "I want a public, legally binding admission that Crimson Oak Designs has full, unrestricted rights to upcycle your discarded barrels. And I want you to pay my lawyer's fees, every single cent." Croft swallowed hard. He looked at Abercrombie, who simply gave a grim, defeated nod. They had zero leverage. They were entirely trapped by their own greed. By Friday afternoon, a certified cashier's check for $500,000 cleared into Hannah's newly unfrozen bank account. The victory was absolute, but the story didn't end in the courtroom. The legal battle leaked to the local Portland press. An investigative journalist for the Oregonian published a massive front-page expose on Harrison Croft's illegal dumping practices and his vicious attempt to sue the young female farmer who had cleaned up his mess. The public backlash was swift and brutal. Croft Estate faced mass boycotts. High-end restaurants across the Pacific Northwest pulled Croft wines from their menus. Wealthy tourists cancelled their tasting reservations. Within a year, Croft Estate's stock plummeted, forcing Harrison to resign as CEO in utter disgrace. Meanwhile, Hannah's business skyrocketed into the stratosphere. The media coverage served as millions of dollars in free advertising. Crimson Oak Designs became a national sensation. People didn't just want a beautiful wine-stained dining table. They wanted a piece of the story. They wanted the table built by the resilient woman who defeated a corrupt billionaire conglomerate. Hannah used the $500,000 settlement to completely transform Mercer Pastures. She paid off the farm's mortgage entirely, securing her family's legacy forever. She built a massive, state-of-the-art woodworking facility on the exact spot where the barrels had been illegally dumped. She hired 20 local craftsmen, paying them top-tier wages. She partnered with dozens of ethical, sustainable vineyards across Oregon and Northern California, charging them a modest, fair fee to responsibly haul away their retired barrels. She diverted thousands of tons of heavy oak from local landfills, turning what was once considered toxic industrial waste into ultra-premium, sustainable luxury furniture. 3 years after the midnight dump that was supposed to ruin her, Hannah Mercer stood on her wraparound porch, holding a mug of coffee. The morning fog was burning off the Willamette Valley. Below, her lower pasture was lush and green, the alfalfa thriving. The sprawling new workshop was buzzing with the sounds of saws and sanders. A fleet of delivery trucks bearing the Crimson Oak Designs logo was rolling down the gravel driveway, heading out to deliver custom orders to luxury hotels in Seattle, San Francisco, and Aspen. Her brother Wyatt, now the lead foreman of the shop, walked up the porch steps, tossing a heavy brass keychain into the air and catching it. "Hey," Wyatt smiled, looking out over the thriving farm. "You remember when we thought that pile of garbage was the end of the world?" Hannah laughed, taking a sip of her coffee. She thought about Harrison Croft, the man who had tried to bury her in his trash. "It wasn't garbage, Wyatt," Hannah said, her eyes shining with quiet, unshakable triumph. "It was just raw material. He just didn't know what to do with it." Hannah's incredible journey proves that sometimes the very thing meant to destroy you is exactly what you need to build your empire. Never let anyone treat you like a dumping ground. If you loved this story of ultimate revenge and brilliant resilience, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to keep fighting, and subscribe to the channel for more unbelievable true-life stories. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below.